Hi there. So you'd like to make some videos and you want to get paid to make those videos. Maybe you want to do some weddings. Maybe you want to make a documentary. But you need to have the right gear. Now, if I was to show up at a wedding and I was filming with something like this, or my smartphone, or even a really good camera like the Osmo Pocket 3, because I'm looking into the Osmo Pocket 3. But the problem is the Osmo Pocket 3 doesn't look professional enough to be shooting at a paid gig or a paid production. So what do you do? And how do you save money doing this? Well, tell me what you think of this camera right here. So I've got a cinematic camera right here. I'm just going to lock this off. And this particular camera, with everything on it, is under $2,000. Now, this is not a sponsored video. I also did not receive any of this gear for free. This is just some information for the people out there that want to get into making videos, but they don't have a lot of money and they want something attainable and something that looks professional. So it's kind of got to look the part, right? What have I got going on here? What kind of camera is this and how did I set all this up? Well, it wasn't all that hard. So I'm going to give you a shot here of what the side of it looks like. So this particular camera is actually a really good 1-inch sensor video-centric camera. It is made by Panasonic. This is the FZ2500. I actually filmed a parade with this camera and it turned out really well. It's got the same size sensor as the Osmo Pocket 3, which looks a lot smaller, right? But if you were to compare the camera with the 1-inch sensor here and a professional camcorder, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. So this is a Sony Z150. It has a 1-inch sensor, and this is the price. And this is a Panasonic professional camcorder. It is the HCX2, and it has a 1-inch sensor, and this is the price of it. And as you can tell, those cameras also look professional, but they're very, very expensive. And the matte box on this camera also has some advantages over the matte box on those cameras because they don't have the ability to plug in extra filters. This one does. I can actually put 2 filters in here. I've got one in here right now. I've got a black mist filter in here. Yeah, I got a black mist filter in here, so I can add filters to this camera. Why did I pick the FZ2500? Well, it's got a decent zoom lens. This zoom lens on this camera, when extended, so when you turn this camera on, the lens will extend. And once it extends, it stays in the out position. All the zooming after that is internal. That is the difference between this bridge camera and other bridge cameras, and why I feel okay about putting this matte box on it. Because a matte box adds some weight. So you don't want to have a zoom lens that's going in and out and holding this much weight. And what I would recommend for this particular camera is that you turn it on before you mount the matte box. So I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to turn this on, and as you can see, it came out, but it's not, you know, there's some weight here. You've got filters on there, and yes, it can extend, but you don't want to have to put any additional weight on anything that's moving. In other words, anytime you have a part that's moving in a servo motor, you don't want to add any strain to it. So even though it will extend with the matte box already mounted to it, I would normally add the matte box after it was in the on position, because now when I put the zoom on it, it's not going to move back and forth. In other words, this isn't going to move at all, and that's also good when you're dealing with things like light. So if you're using these little doors here to deal with the light problems, then you don't want to have the zoom moving in and out, because that's also going to change the light that's going into the lens. You want everything to stay put, so you want the zoom to be internal. The zoom on this camera is very similar to a zoom lens that Sony makes, which is also an internal zoom, and it is worth $3,400. Yeah. So if you're at a wedding or you're making a documentary, you're going to need some zoom. Bokeh's not going to be your primary concern. bokeh is going to be your secondary concern, because if you need to zoom in on the groom or the bride, or you need to zoom in on an animal for a documentary, or you are doing an outdoor shot and you need to zoom in on something, zoom is going to be the most critical part of your video. I've added a monitor to this camera. I'm just going to lower it down. This monitor is made by FieldWorld. It is a very inexpensive monitor, but it has false color. I'll put a link in the description so that you can find it. I think it's only worth about $130. The matte box is worth about $200 or $178, and the filter that I put on it, the black mist filter, is worth another $100. So a little bit of an investment on that. But those filters are going to give you pro results. So this matte box is going to give you pro results. It doesn't just look professional, it has an actual function. These matte boxes, you can adjust them, you can adjust the flaps on them. So the other thing is that I've got this cage on here, and I put a cage on there, and I recommend that. You don't have to buy a cage, but the cage prevents any damage done to the hot shoe on the camera. So I could put the monitor directly on the camera, and you could do that. It'll save some weight. But if you were to bump this or hit this or anything like that, you risk damaging your camera and damaging the hot shoe. So that's why I would recommend this cage. This cage is worth about $50, and it looks like it's worth a lot more than that. And it also adds these nice little grippy handles. The other thing that I've added onto this camera is I've got the remote control. So this way you're not doing the zoom in and out using the controls up here. You're doing it from back here. You could even take this and mount it on the handle in the back. So if I was to take this remote, I could put it on this handle back here if I wanted to, and then that way I have a lot more control. So the other thing I would like to talk about is this professional monopod, and it is made by a company called Avella, and I'm going to be doing a separate review on this monopod. They did not send me this monopod. Like I said, all of this gear I bought with my own money. If you click on any links that I put to buy any of this gear, I do not get a commission. I do not want a commission. So when I put a link in the description about a product, it's because I actually like that gear, not because I just want to get a commission on it. And I believe that's part of the honesty of some of these reviews, is that if you really like that gear, then you shouldn't be worried about getting a commission on it. What is the advantage of this camcorder over a professional camcorder that's worth $3,500 or $4,000, or if you go with a Canon XF705, in that case it's worth about $12,000. They're very expensive. That matte box can hold 2 filters. So if I wanted to do an anamorphic style film, I can do that, and you can have those nice little blue lines, or you can do a gold mist filter and have the orange lines. Or you can put a different type of black mist filter on there, because this is a 1/8 black mist filter, so I wanted a little bit of a softening effect on the skin. It kind of gives like a dreamy effect, and you can't do that with the camera just as it is. So what are the disadvantages of this camera? Well, you don't have all the codecs that you do with professional camcorders. You're not going to have SDI output. You're not going to have anything like that. Now, you could get an SDI to HDMI converter, and you could get around that way. But as far as some of the other codecs and the other features on those camcorders, you're not going to have those. But this is going to be more than adequate for filming a wedding. It's going to be more than adequate if you're just starting out in the documentary game. And as you get paid for more and more gigs, you're going to be able to use that money and get better gear. You're not going to have to go extremely in debt so that you can get started. This is something that you can get started at a fairly reasonable cost. And even though $2,000 is still a lot of money to some people, in the camera world, $2,000 for a rig like this is actually considered pretty cheap. So, yeah. Now, the other thing about having a setup like this is that if you did bring along additional gear, like a little camcorder like this, and you had it in a tripod in the corner, or you brought an Osmo Pocket 3 and you had it in another shot, well, now you've got multiple cameras for the same price as you would have to be able to buy one camera for. And that's going to give your video the creativity that it needs, because you need those angles. And people aren't going to question you bringing this along with this. But if you only brought this, then they're going to say, no, I don't want you filming my video. I don't think your gear is good enough. But if you show up with this, and then you just start putting these around in different spots, and you start putting like an Osmo Pocket 3, you can just say, well, that's just for B-roll. They're not going to understand that you're trying to get different camera angles. And then once you show them the end result of the video and how well it is and your creativity and the music that you added, well, they're not even going to care at that point. They're going to say, well, this looks really good, because that's, at the end of the day, that's all they really care about. How well does it look? How well does it sound? Does it look professional? Does it sound professional? Can I share it? And that is what's going to get you more jobs in the future. Now, the other thing that I need to bring up is lighting. So the other reason why you would want to go with a rig like this is because it's going to leave you with enough money left over to buy some decent lighting, because you're also going to need lighting because weddings especially are very dark. You're going to need to invest in that. You're also going to need to invest in microphones. You're also going to need to invest in a lot of things. You know, you're going to need to invest in camera bags so you can haul it around. You're going to need wagons and things like that, because I got a wagon that I haul my gear around in. So you're going to need those things. And all of these things are going to add up in costs. So you need to be able to start as cheap as you can, so that once you get started, you can always add more gear later. You see where I'm going with this. So do I think this is good enough for documentaries and good enough for wedding videos and things like that? Yes. Would I, think that I'm going to get an Oscar-winning documentary with this? Well, I guess it all depends on my creativity. How well was, what was the story that I was telling? If the story is good enough, who knows? So it's all about how good of a storyteller you are. Can you tell a good story? And today we're talking about a story of how you got started and how inexpensive you got started. Guys like Steven Spielberg, they started on a very small budget. Guys like James Cameron, they did not start on big budgets. They started small. They started really small. And incidentally, Steven Spielberg didn't use a lot of bokeh in his movies. Go take a look at Jaws. Go take a look at all of his movies and tell me how much of a blurry background you see in those movies. Not a lot of blurry background, big blockbuster hits. So can you use something like this? Absolutely. So if you'd like to learn more about this professional monopod and how I think it can compete with the iFootage Cobra 3 Strike, well, then hit that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and as soon as I upload that video, you'll get to see it. If you'd like to see what this camera can do, I'm going to put on the end screen of one of the parades that I shot with this camera, because it's got built-in internal ND filters, and proof is in the pudding. What does the video look like? Does it look good? How is the zoom? Is the zoom gradual? Is it not gradual? And by the way, I didn't even have the remote control when I filmed that, and I didn't even have it on a monopod. I was basically hand-holding the camera the entire time. I was only using this little selfie stick, which has kind of a tripod, but it's not very stable, and you can't lock it off like this. So this is a much better setup. I've added to this setup, and that is the whole point, is you start someplace and then you gradually add to your gear. You can't afford to buy everything all at once, but you're going to need to start someplace. This is a good foundation to start if you want to start into the wedding business. This is a good foundation to start if you'd like to get into documentaries. And that's it for this video. So take care, be safe at work, and hit that subscribe button notification, and you'll see more about that monopod on the next video. Bye.